Hello, everybody. I'm Katarína Bolemant, and today's webinar is about the news related to MidPoint 4.8. We will start with introducing new support model. Then we will closer on the features and improvements coming with MidPoint 4.8. As a quick reminder, we will go through the most interesting features added since last LTS version, MidPoint 4.4. I'll briefly mention deprecations, removals, and incompatible changes in MidPoint 4.8. At the end, we will look into the future, including a plan for MidPoint 4.9, timeline for next releases, and introduction of webinars we are planning later this year. Let's start with the new support model. Till now, MidPoint was released 2 times in a year, in spring and in autumn. There were 3 feature releases in a row, followed by the LTS version released every second year. The aim of the feature releases is mainly to bring new features and improvements, while LTS releases are mostly about stabilization and preparation of previously developed features to be ready to use. With this pace during past few years, MidPoint brought many interesting features, improvements, security fixes, and became more mature. This maturity led us to think about the length of the release cycle and the length of the standard support. Therefore, we decided to change previous half-year release cycle to 1-year release cycle. New versions coming after the 4.8 will be released every autumn, approximately around the beginning of the October. Since it'll take 1 year to come out with the new version, the length of the standard support for feature releases to be 1 year doesn't make sense anymore. Therefore, every feature release after MidPoint 4.8 will be supported for 2 years. Starting with MidPoint 4.8, every LTS release will be supported for 5 years. In case of the LTS versions, there are 2 options how to prolong the support. First time with the extended support, adding 3 years, and after that, with the vintage support, adding another 2 years. Adding this up, LTS versions can be supported up to 10 years. All the previously stated changes also led to the adjustment in frequency of the LTS releases. This is change from releasing LTS version every second year to every 4th year, which results to the next LTS version being released in autumn 2027. MidPoint 4.8 with codename Curie is the 3rd LTS version and the 1st LTS version with 5-year standard support. During development of MidPoint 4.8, we focused on developing new features such as role mining, identity recovery, improvements regarding security, bringing improvements to provide streamlined upgrades, and preparation of the methodology with the name First Steps with MidPoint. Probably the most compelling features of MidPoint 4.8 is role mining. I'll start with the picture on the right. It is showing the distribution of roles in MidPoint, how many members the roles have, how many assignments to the roles users have. And now imagine you have thousands of users and 10,000 of roles in your MidPoint environment. This leads to the situation when users become overwhelmed with hundreds or thousands of assignments to these roles. If you are a manager of only a few users with thousands of assignments and you need to review the access for your subordinates, it can take too much time. But it would be much better if the user had just a few assignments to business roles and you would only need to recertify those ones. But defining such business roles is not a simple process. It requires deep knowledge of the processes, job functions, existing permissions, and exceptions. In addition, it expects a cooperation among subject matter experts, IT professionals, line of business managers. And this is the place where the role mining comes handy. Role mining is an AI-powered functionality for mining business roles based on the existing assignments to application roles in MidPoint. During the role mining session, existing assignments to application roles are analyzed with the aim to find business role candidates. Such candidates are detected based on the data clustering, pattern recognition, and similarity methods. As the result, different data clusters are created with one or more suggestions for new business role. Such business role suggestions are later analyzed, adjusted according to the business needs, and applied to the users. Role mining is often used as a synonym for bottom-up approach for creating business roles. While top-down approach on its own might be labor-intense and is primarily business-driven, bottom-up role engineering approach uses existing data and thus helps navigating throughout the tangle of permissions. Once the business roles are found and properly rationalized and applied, the organization gains more organized business role-based model. At the end, the overall risk of access escalation is reduced, thus the security is improved. Moreover, the entire IGA is more understandable and manageable. Let's look at the example of the role mining in MidPoint. It all starts with creating the role analysis session. Few configuration attributes need to be set, which are then used to analyze data and create clusters according to the similarities in assignments. For this purpose, this density-based clustering algorithm is used. After such session is created and clusters are analyzed, you can see candidate roles for a specific cluster. In the picture 1, we can see the example for the user permission metrics for a specific cluster. We can see the overlap in users' assignments, which is the base for business role candidates. In the picture 2 on the slide, examples for candidate roles are shown. There are different metrics such as the overall reduction of assignments after applying such role candidate, but also how many roles are considered and what's the number of users being processed. After selecting any of the suggested business role, the impact of the role can be also seen in the user permission metrics as shown in the picture 3. Selected business role is highlighted with the green color in the picture. Role mining brings many benefits. Among others, it leads to simplified access management because it's always simpler to assign, revoke, or recertify a single business role rather than multiple individual roles. It also reduces administrative overhead. Administrators don't need to know which permissions are tied up to which job position. Instead, they will just simply assign the role related to job position and all required accesses will be provided to the user. It makes the access transparent, for example, for end users having to request their access. It will be easier for them to have something meaningful they can understand rather than navigate throughout the low-level permissions. Another benefit is efficient audit trails. With business roles in place, logs can capture more significant, meaningful changes and reduce the noise with granular access changes. Possibility of quick adaptation to changing business needs, ensuring that the employees always have what they need to have can enhance the business agility. Another new feature coming with MidPoint 4.8 is called identity recovery. Can't remember your username? No worries, enable this feature and MidPoint will lead you through the process to find it out. Since every deployment is specific and even in one deployment different rules and information about different kinds of identities might be relevant, the process for finding username is fully configurable. There might be different data requested from different kinds of users. For example, MidPoint will ask teachers to provide their badge number as one of the correlations attributes, but will ask for student's ID when the recovery is asked by student. Even the number of steps needed during the process might differ. For some users, just one step might be enough. For others, even 5 might be required. Identity recovery feature is based on 2 existing MidPoint features: smart correlation and flexible authentication. Smart correlation is used to find a matching user in MidPoint, while flexible authentication configuration determines which and how many steps there will be in total. In situations where 5 different correlation rules are chained, but MidPoint found just one user after a third of them, the process of the recovery ends and the found user's information are disclosed. Which data will be disclosed is also configurable, and by default just username will be displayed. This can be later used for a login to MidPoint or for password recovery, for example. On the other hand, if after running all 5 correlation rules, MidPoint won't narrow the result to one user, but instead, let's say 10 users will be found, the process will act according to the configuration. It means there is an option to limit the total number of the identities disclosed. If the configuration says we expect at most 3 users in any case, the identity recovery ends with an error because we found 10 users and it's not safe to show all of them. If the number of found users is less than the threshold, all found users are disclosed. Information about users being disclosed is audited. Disclosing information about existence of the user might be sensitive in general. Hence, our recommendation is to use this feature carefully, maybe even consider configuring rate limits in your proxy server. During the development of identity recovery feature, another authentication modules were added. Namely, it was archetype selection, correlation, and dual model. Together with changes related to password-rested improvements introduced in MidPoint 4.7, we can now say MidPoint supports multi-step and multi-factor authentication. Login pages were adapted, and it is possible to enjoy the same modularity for a login as it is for the password reset and the identity recovery features. There were more improvements related to the security. One of the significant improvements is regarding the performance. Briefly described, during any operation in MidPoint, authorizations are checked, and the get object or search objects operations are not different. Previously, this checking of authorization consisted of different phases. Some were related to data itself, but some were aimed for graphical user interface to be able to show only relevant parts, for example, while generating formulas on the details page. This algorithm was changed, and the parts of the algorithms used mainly by graphical user interface were factored out to be processed only when needed. Looking at the chart on the right side of the slide, you can see that the performance gain was significant. It affects different parts of MidPoint. For example, all graphical user interface pages where only listing objects is requested. It speeds up report generation and will also help with the performance in scripts where methods such as getObject or searchObjects are called. Another improvement regarding security in MidPoint 4.8 is related to the elevation of privileges. In previous versions, if some scripts were needed to be evaluated under the users with insufficient permissions, this script had to be configured with run as ref pointing to the more privileged user. In MidPoint 4.8, another option, run privileged, was added. The benefit of this new option is that the whole process is audited under the original user, and the performance of this option is better since it doesn't require switching the logged-in user, and so it doesn't need to perform operations related to such a switch. Auditing was also improved for the older or previous option run as ref, now it is possible to see which user was logged in and which actions run under someone else. To provide the possibility to run custom actions under the non-super users, trusted bulk actions were introduced. The good example why this was needed are custom actions which can be configured in GUI using task templates. Such templates usually contain bulk actions, which contain Groovy scripts, which need to be executed. Since the Groovy scripts are in general dangerous, there existed the restriction that such actions could be performed only under the administrator. In MidPoint 4.8, this was changed. To provide a safe option to perform such actions, support of determining the origin of the expression or bulk action, together with execution under the corresponding expression profile, was added. If you are interested in more details, please read the documentation and release notes related to the security improvements. Worth mentioning is added support for automatic scanning of any publicly disclosed vulnerabilities in dependencies used by MidPoint. This can help with revealing the security threats soon. The results are manually reviewed and false positive vulnerabilities are marked. If you use your own dependency scanning and you are curious about our findings and if specific vulnerability is applicable, you can look at the report and the list of false positive findings. It's always good to be up to date, and usually it's better to use newer than older versions. To achieve it, one must upgrade to the newer version, and sometimes the upgrade process might be complex and even painful. There may have been many changes in the data model, resulting to changes in the database schema. Some configurations might be deprecated or removed, and the old way of doing things must be therefore migrated to the new one. Having a tool, such as Ninja is, might come handy in such situations. During the MidPoint 4.8 development, we extended Ninja with new functionality with the aim to simplify the upgrade process for MidPoint. The improvements were also backported to the 4.4.6 and 4.7.2 releases. The upgrade process with Ninja consists of two phases: preparation phase, which can be done with MidPoint up and running, and upgrade phase, which requires downtime of MidPoint instances. During the preparation phase, validation of objects runs to reveal what must be migrated, such as a remote configuration, what should be migrated, such as deprecated configuration, if the automatic migration is supported, and so on. In the report, there is also information if the migration needs to be done on the version you're currently running, or if it can wait after upgrading to 4.8. You can also explicitly mark what should be skipped during automatic migration. We strongly recommend performing any migration necessary for current version because in 4.8, support for this configuration might be removed. After the objects are migrated, MidPoint distribution can be upgraded. Ninja can also help with steps related to upgrading the distribution. Those include checking the version of the database schema and versions of cluster nodes, downloading a distribution for a new version, and upgrading the database schema, and finally, MidPoint installation. As an experimental feature, we implemented support for upgrading initial objects. It is based on object merging and then comparing the state of the object before and after merge. In this version, only positive deltas are considered. It's always good practice to first run report to see what changes MidPoint will execute before you really execute them. Last year, we also focused on preparing simplified midpoint deployment methodology. The methodology describes an iterative approach of deployment, providing values in small steps as soon as possible. Methodology is based on graphical user interface and uses advanced features such as simulations, object marks, or smart correlation. We also prepare training based on this methodology. The training will teach you how to use these advanced features to achieve quick win by going to production in short time, regardless of the quality of data. It will show how to automate the joiner, mover, lever processes and manage the bird-right permissions. As mentioned, this methodology is based on using graphical user interface, which was also the motivation to renovate and modernize the resource wizard. It is one of the main building blocks for the methodology, since every project starts with connecting applications and systems to MidPoint. New Resource Wizard was introduced in 4.6, and since then, iterative improvements were made to make sure all steps required to connect to an application will be as easy as possible. During 4.8, our focus was mainly on configuration of activation and password mappings. When speaking about activation, the changes were more significant. To make life easier when it comes to advanced scenarios such as disable instead of delete, delayed delete, or pre-create, we decided to add support for predefined mappings. To configure these scenarios, it is now as simple as selecting what you want to do and define a time constraint when it should happen. In past, combination of existing mappings together with administrative status mappings had to be defined. This option is still available and can be used for more advanced scenarios. However, in most cases, simplified predefined mappings should be good enough. Password mapping steps were also reworked to be easier to use and provide better user experience. The individual steps, or in other words, smaller wizards of Resource Wizard, are integrated into the research details page. One can navigate, for example, to change the activation mapping directly from the view where all the accounts are listed. Accounts, entitlements, generics panels on research details page were also reworked. Previously, they were pretty complicated, combining both repository and resource views, which added even more complexity to the view. With the aim to simplify and provide better user experience, those panels were reworked, simplified with clearly defined intent. Since MidPoint 4.8, all those panels will show only data from the repository. For resource view or for data from resource objects panel must be used. We hope you will enjoy all the changes regarding user experience in MidPoint 4.8. These were just a few changes in 4.8. For the full list, please see the release notes. Since MidPoint 4.8 is LTS version, and there is a possibility to migrate directly from previous LTS, which was 4.4, there is just a quick reminder about the most significant features added after 4.4. One of the biggest and unique features added in MidPoint 4.7 are simulations. Together with object marks, we believe identity governance journey with MidPoint will be simple, safer, and faster. Another interesting feature which you should not miss is smart correlation. This feature can be used to correlate accounts while connecting new systems, but it is also used when the identity recovery feature is enabled. New access request wizard was introduced with the aim to improve user experience, provide more configuration options, how to adjust the flow to the needs of the company. IGA reporting was improved as well. For example, the report who has access to what and why. New research template concept was introduced, which allows templating also on the level of object type. For example, if you need different object type definitions for research and they have many common behavior, it is possible to define one parent object type definition with all the common functionality, while in concrete object type definition, only the specific behavior will be defined. And also, overall look and feel was refreshed after upgrading to Admin LTE version 3. Speaking about platforms, few adjustments were made since MidPoint 4.8 is of the LTS family. Also, Windows servers are supported for production use. Specifically, Windows Server 2022 is supported. For Java, recommended version is Java 21, which is newest LTS Java version. Java 17 is still supported, but older versions are not. Regarding databases, there are 3 databases supported for production use. It is PostgreSQL version 14, 15, and the newest version 16. PostgreSQL is supported only with native MidPoint implementation. For generic repository implementation, Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server are supported. Generic implementation is in general deprecated. However, unless another native implementation exists for any of these databases, they will remain in this state. New features, however, might not be available by using these deprecated supported databases. For full list of deprecations, removals, incompatible changes, and behavior changes, please see the release notes. Just to note some, support for using PostgreSQL database with generic repository implementation was removed. The native implementation for PostgreSQL exists for 2 years, and therefore we recommend to migrate to it. Ninja options were consolidated, which resulted to incompatibilities. Please see the Ninja documentation to be sure you are using correct options. These changes were also backported to 4.4.6 and 4.7.2. Therefore, also those versions are affected. When password recent functionality is enabled and only mail nonce or only security questions module is used, such configuration won't work correctly with MidPoint 4.8. Those modules were reworked and now they require additional module to identify the user before they are used. Focus identification module can be used for such purposes. As usual, some changes were made in initial objects. Therefore, after your installation is upgraded to MidPoint 4.8, please make sure those changes were applied appropriately. In some cases, graphical user interface is dependent on configuration present in initial objects, and therefore it might seem there is a bug, but in fact, it is just initial object which was not updated. Make also sure you run Ninja Verify before and after migration to see the deprecation and removals related to your configuration. Looking to the future, next MidPoint version 4.9 is planned to be released approximately in 1 year on October 1st, 2024. It will be feature release supported for 2 years. So what you can expect, we are currently discovering what we need to change and implement to be compliant with web accessibility guidelines. Another plan is to implement full attribute caching with more fine-grained configuration options. There are many benefits behind this feature. For example, better support for resources where read operation is not present, or better reporting options based on cached data. Another benefit is also related to the lightweight processing, which is the goal also for 4.9. With lightweight processing, the idea is to process only minimum data and make only minimum traffic in the infrastructure without breaking consistency. You can also expect improvements regarding role engineering. More specifically, we want to continue with role mining and its better connection with the management of roles, such as creating role and managing the whole lifecycle. Some changes are planned also to improve the support for configuration management. For example, if the resource is created using Resource Wizard in MidPoint, but later there is a need to download such resource and, for example, push it to some Git repository, there need to be an option how to post-process such resource before it is pushed to the Git. Few improvements are also planned for certifications, better configuration for a lifecycle model, and simplification for groups and membership management. This is just still a plan, so it might change in time, but let's hope it won't. I also prepared the timeline for planned releases. As you can see, maintenance version 4.8.1 is planned to be released on January 29. 4.8.2 is planned on May 10, 4.8.3 on August 19, followed by the feature release 4.9 planned for October 1st. This is planned timeline, and if nothing unexpected happens, we will go according to it. However, for example, any security vulnerability might change the plan, since if there is any vulnerability, new maintenance version will be released as soon as the fix is available. We also plan a bunch of the webinars after today's What's New webinar. Next week, there will be First Steps Methodology webinar introducing the new simplified MidPoint deployment methodology. Then on November 21st, the Resource Wizard will be shown in action in more depth. On December 5th, the public webinar organized by Kuppinger and Cole with the topic Navigating the Access Control Maze will be held. And the last but not least of the currently planned webinars is about upgrading with Ninja, planned for the January 25th. After this webinar, we'll be happy to meet with all of you in person at TIIME Unconference in Copenhagen. Before the official Unconference, there will be a MidPoint working group where you can meet us in person. We are also preparing 3 workshops taking place there and bunch of the presentations. Should you be interested to become one of the speakers during the MidPoint working group, please let us know by contacting marketing@evolveum.com. It is welcome to speak about anything related to MidPoint, share your knowledge, journey, and experience. Okay, so let's wrap up the webinar for today. So there are many changes and challenges after 4.8. One of the biggest change, and we hope for better, is the length of the standard support. For MidPoint 4.8, it is now 5 years of standard support. We prepared new methodology based on which also training will be available. Don't hesitate and book your seat today. If you are interested in workshops, being a speaker in the MidPoint working group before time, or you just want to meet and chat with us in person, you can also register for TIIME Unconference. And a bit of tuning into the future. Thanks to the NGA0 review, we are preparing the report with the results of the penetration testing for MidPoint 4.8. We are also working on the document summarizing where and how MidPoint can help with ISO 27001 compliance. And the last but not least, in 2024, more webinars are coming. We will add the specific timeline shortly as well. If you have any feedback, please let us know. You can contact us at info@evolveum.com, and don't forget to follow us on social media to not miss any news. Thank you very much.